Hello everybody, welcome back to our second day of our Digital Humanism workshops with panels on the strategies for a humanistic digital future. It's already our third workshop in 1.5 years, so we are really active. Yesterday we had two excellent panels on education for the future with a focus on university teaching, and we had one on AI developments in Europe. Today we will have two panels, one on resilience and sustainability, which is moderated by Sally White and together with Edward Lee, Moshe Wadi and Eric Massenetz. And then we will have a second one on international initiatives similar to ours, which is moderated by Carlo from Politecnico Milano, Carlo Gezzi. And panelists are Viola Schiafonatti, Marcel Breuersma, Michelle Elam and Paul Timmers. Each panel will have 75 minutes, including discussion Q&A. And then we have a 15 minutes break where we will keep the system running. We need to, because we have a link also to YouTube, so there's a streaming. The second panel will start at 5:30 p.m. point, so we will look for the timing. And at the end, we have, again, a piece of music by Eric Brehm, who already performed yesterday. So in addition to philosophy and computer science, he is also active in music. Thank you, Eric. Before handing over to Sally for moderating the panel, I want to thank all the panelists, the moderators, also the member of our international program committee on this digital humanism initiative, who really work together to make these events happen, and also to the group here at the faculty who is preparing all the organizational things and the technical, and without them this would not work. Sally will moderate the first panel. So Sally is a professor of digital cultures at Maastricht University. As such, she's also one of the coordinator of the Dutch Digital Society program, which we will hear also later today. And she's looking and studying the societal aspects of digital technologies and with a focus on access and inequality. She has co-edited a book together with Andrew Webster on health technology and societies, critical inquiries, and she has co-authored, written a book together with Anna Harris and Susan Kelly, was prize-winning book on cybergenetics, health genetics, and new media. This was published in 2002. Sally, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, my apologies. My neighbors have decided to rebuild their house. There is occasionally drilling and other noises. So I will mute whenever possible, and I apologize if you hear strange noises from me. And I would really like to thank Hannes and all of his colleagues and everyone else who's made this possible. And yesterday was a really interesting day, and it's great to see so many people able to join us and talk about these really important issues. Our focus in this session is on resilience and sustainability in a fairly broad sense. As you might have seen in the description, certainly one thing we've all learned in the last 8 months is how important digital infrastructure is. And that raises all sorts of interesting political questions about the governance of the digital infrastructure and its ownership and who has access to it, which I'm sure we've all kind of experienced and thought about in different ways. And yesterday we also touched on issues around sort of cultural and societal sustainability and questions of democracy. But I think there are other aspects of sustainability that we're going to be talking more about today in terms of the kind of technical resilience of the system, or you can also think about it as the vulnerability of the system, energy uses, a kind of more conventional understanding of the word of sustainability. I read something yesterday that if we all sent one less email each day, that this would make a huge difference to the energy requirements of our digital infrastructure. I'm not sure if that's true, but it's I'm thinking about who I'm not going to send an email to today, which might
send us an email about it to remind us.
yeah. And one final point before I introduce our first speaker. If you've looked at the lineup today, you might be thinking, 3 men, or some of you might be thinking that. If you joined us yesterday, you will know that in the session on AI in Europe, it was all women. So per panel, the balance isn't great, but overall, it's extremely good over these 2 days. So I don't want anyone thinking that we didn't think about this. We did think about this as organizers. So first up today, and each speaker will have sort of maximum of 15 minutes, because there are only 3 of them, so that would still give us time for discussion at the end. But if anyone has a really burning question that they want to answer, well, ask, then we'll kind of make time for that before going on to the next speaker. But we'll make sure that there is time at the end as well. So our first speaker is Edward Lee, who's been working on software systems for 40 years. And there's no comment on your age, Edward, but you said this yourself, but I've noticed a lot amongst computer scientists and engineers and physicists that often as they get older, they start to reflect more on the philosophical and societal implications of the work that they've been doing, which you're doing as well, which I think is great, because I think it's really important that people who really understand these issues also join kind of us in the social sciences and the humanities and thinking about these things. So Edward was educated at Yale, MIT, spent time at Bell Labs, and is now at Berkeley, where he's also professor of the Graduate School in Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences. His work focuses on cyber-physical systems, which integrate computing with the physical world. He's also the author of several textbooks and books for a kind of wider audience about the entwined futures of humans and machines, and another with more recently, or from 2017, with the wonderful title of Plato and the Nerd. So without further ado, Edward, the floor is yours. I understand you don't need to share slides, and I will now mute because there is hammering next door.
Thank you, Sally. I'm going to go PowerPointless, so to speak, in part because I'm a little intimidated. The panelists yesterday had the most spectacular graphics along with their very thoughtful comments, and I figured I couldn't possibly match that. So, Hannes asked me to speak about about cyber-physical systems, about the Internet of Things, basically about the implications of the increased connectivity that our information infrastructure has with our physical world. That's basically the topic that I'm going to try to address. Now, let me just start by saying, a little bit of a personal experience. I live in an old house. It's a house with a very quirky heating system. I live in California, so we don't use heat quite as intensively as much of the rest of the world. But the master bathroom has its own separate heating system, and we used to have a timer-based thermostat there, and had to pre-program it to anticipate when we would be getting up in the morning. And I recently replaced it with an internet connected one. And so I can lie in bed, open my iPad, warm up the bathroom before I have to get out of bed and go use it. Okay, so this is not a Nest. There's no AI involved in this thermostat. It's just connectivity. But unfortunately, one of the consequences of this is that Honeywell now knows when I get up every morning. It knows when I'm out of town. And if you were to, in fact, connect this thermostat to an AI, it could actually do things that would be considerably more insidious. Okay. It would have access to my calendar. It would be able to better predict when I would get up and preemptively warm the bathroom. It could set up with some form of reinforcement learning where the reward to the AI occurs when the bathroom is warm and occupied. And a penalty occurs when the bathroom is cold and occupied, right? There would be a feedback system where the AI would perhaps learn to be able to influence my behavior. It could start, for example, to feed me search results and YouTube videos that emphasize the health benefits of getting up every day at the same time, right? This would enhance its reward because it would be able to better predict my behavior by, in fact, influencing my behavior. Now, this is a principle that I first heard from my colleague, Stuart Russell, who published a book just this year called Human Compatible, where he points out that this sort of feedback loop with behavioral influences is actually quite prevalent. The AIs at Facebook and Google, what's their primary goal? Well, their goal is to try to get you to click on ads, right? That's the business model for those two institutions. So they're trying to predict what will get you to click on ads. But because this is a feedback loop with machine learning, Stuart points out that if they influence your behavior and change your behavior, they will make you more predictable. And they will be able to more effectively get you to click on their ads. So it's a natural and perhaps unintended consequence of such feedback loops that the AIs are changing us in ways that make us more likely to reward them by clicking on ads. Now, one way that they can do this is by feeding our filter bubbles. And it's a fact that people with more extreme views are more predictable than people with more moderate views. And so the AIs learn to feed us information that makes us more extreme, feeds our obsessions, reinforces our conspiracy theories, et cetera. And that is actually resulting in changing our behavior. Now, through the Internet of Things and cyber-physical systems, the AIs actually get access to vastly more sensing and more interestingly, vastly more actuation capabilities in the physical world. They're no longer just information processing machines, but they become cyber-physical systems, not only sensing, but also affecting the physical world, not just the information world. So they not only sense to act, but they also act to sense. Scientists have realized actually for hundreds of years that biological sensory systems are greatly enhanced by the ability to act. So about 200 years ago, a German scientist published a book that illustrated this essential concept with a simple experiment. If you hold out your hand and close your eyes, and a friend of yours takes a physical object like this spoon and rolls it around in your hand, and you're just holding your hand still, you will not be able to tell what this is. But if you grasp it, you instantly know what it is. It takes no time at all. The acting and the feedback loop that's formed in this act to sense kind of phenomenon greatly enhances the ability for animals to function in the real world. And machines are acquiring this ability to act to sense. They can manipulate the physical world around us, around them, including us humans. So what are the consequences of this? Well, I'd like to look at three consequences of this ability to act to sense. One is in biological systems, it enables what biologists call ecosystem engineering, where creatures alter their environment. So humans are not nature's first ecosystem engineers. Earlier examples include ants and beavers who alter the ecology in ways that then affect their own development. It actually feeds back into their evolutionary development. And feedback loops like that are pretty common in nature. But so software systems actually already do a fair amount of act to sense. The ordering of search results that you get in a search engine, YouTube selection of the next video for you to watch, Facebook's newsfeed, these are all examples of acting to sense. They're actually affecting the physical world in order to then enhance their ability to sense that physical world. And this is much more extreme, actually, in China's version of the internet. So there's a wonderful book written by Kai-Fu Lee, who's the former director of Google's China operation. This book was published 2 years ago. It's called Superpowers. And he claims that China has a huge leg up on the US in the AI arms race because of a vastly richer sensing and actuation. So I'm going to just quote from his book. So he says, Silicon Valley juggernauts are amassing data from your activities on their platforms, but that data concentrates heavily in your online behavior, such as searches made, photos uploaded, YouTube videos watched, posts liked. Chinese companies are instead gathering data from the real world, the what, when, and where of physical purchases, meals, makeovers, and transportation. So I've been to China several times in the last couple of years, and I've seen this firsthand. It's become a cashless society where everything you do is mediated by Alipay and WeChat. Everything you do in the physical world is mediated by these platforms. And this suggests that the ecosystem engineering of the AIs is likely to extend much more deeply into our lives than just affecting our purchasing behavior, which is what we're seeing more in the US. It's not just about ads, it's about everything else. There's a second, perhaps more profound consequence of the machines being able to act a sense. And this one is a little bit subtle, so bear with me, okay? A key feature that distinguishes animals from plants is that they have more mechanisms for acting on their environment. So every action we take feeds back into our senses. One of the benefits of that is that we can tell the difference between self and not self. When I hold out my hand, if something in my environment scratches it, that feels completely different from me scratching it myself. The sensory data that my brain receives is completely different in those two circumstances, because specifically this feedback loop enables me, my nervous system, to form a sense of self, make this distinction between self and non-self. It turns out that this is a property of all animals, including animals that are very much simpler than humans. So there's a species of worm that's a favorite for neuroscientists to study because it has a nervous system that has only a few hundred neurons. And even with only a few hundred neurons, they've been able to show that this worm's nervous system can tell self from not self. So in some ways, this very basic mechanism is probably the beginning foundation of what then evolved into a much more elaborate sense of self that humans have and that other animals have, which is the sense of self that gives them the prerequisite for agency in the world. So machines are starting to acquire this ability to make this distinction between self and non-self. So an Amazon Echo, for example, the famous Alexa, can tell the difference between microphone data where it picks up its own voice versus microphone data that picks up a human voice in the environment. So are the machines actually acquiring the basic building blocks for a sense of self and hence the ability to start to form some form of agency in our environment? So the third consequence of this act of sense, I'd like to just, I'll read briefly from my book. So it's common at Facebook when considering a change to the user interface to randomly select users to whom a variant of the user interface is presented. The reactions of the users, whether they click on an ad, for example, can be measured and compared to a control group, which sees the old user interface. In this way, Facebook software can determine whether some feature of the user interface causes more clicks on ads. This process can be automated, enabling the software to experiment and learn what causes users to click on ads. This can result in software designing and refining its own user interfaces. So this ability to probe the world and measure the response is a basic prerequisite for self-improvement. It's the starting point of software being able to develop itself or develop the technology largely independently of humans. So with these three consequences, these are things that really could change our relationships with the technology. The machines are getting much more tightly integrated with the physical environment. They're acquiring more sensors and more ways to affect their environment. And this has a lot of positive consequences. I don't want to focus exclusively on the negative. In the case of my thermostat, for example, it leads to a greatly reduced energy usage. When I had the timer-based thermostat, the heater would run for about 2 hours a day. Now it rarely runs for more than 10 minutes because that's really all that's needed. Systems become safer. Systems become more robust to changes in their environment when they can sense better and act to sense, probing their environment. Systems can diagnose potential failures in themselves and in others. But there's also risks. The machines acquire more information about us. They learn to manipulate us. And as they get better at distinguishing self from non-self, they may acquire an independent agency and learn to self-improve without our help. And this could weaken the already tenuous control we have over the trajectory of technology and its effect on our culture. So I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward. That was a very interesting and provocative opening, I think, for this afternoon. Where I am. Any quick questions before we move on to the next speaker? I mean, we'll have time at the end for a general discussion, but if there's anybody burning to say something, might be easier. Oh yes, Jim Laris.
Hey, sorry. Ed, I have a question for you. So do you think that the machines learning to, or basically acquiring autonomy and sort of rising up against people is a bigger threat than the one that you started with, which is the companies that produce these systems collecting information on you? The fact that Honeywell has all this information on you. Honeywell's fairly benign, but what about Google or Apple or some other company that has a lot more information about you?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, my concern, I don't really put much currency in these stories about the machines rising up against humans and taking over the world and leaving us sidelined. I don't think that's what we're going to see. I think what we're going to see is a co-evolution of humans and the technology. So the humans are going to change, our culture is going to change. And it may change in ways that many of us might find less attractive. That's the thing that I think we need to be guarding against. I don't really believe these stories that we're sort of doomed to a Matrix-like scenario where humans get sidelined. I think that's just science fiction.
Or your colleague, Stuart.
Okay, I see your hand is up, Moshe, but you're going to be able to speak next anyway. So I would like to move on, and then I think there's a lot to discuss here about what the threats and promises are of these potentially more autonomous machines in whatever form they might take. It's a great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Moshe Varde, who's a professor at Rice University in Texas, and a leading researcher in the field of logic applications in computer science, and has also played a big role in what the role of computer science in society could and should be. He's written a lot and spoken a lot about the implications of robotics and artificial intelligence, which is partly what we've just been speaking about. And he's also been the editor-in-chief of communications of the ACM. He first studied physics and computer science at Bar Ilan University in Israel, and received his doctorate from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He's worked in many different places, and I'm very much looking forward to what he's going to share with us about lessons from COVID. So Moshe, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I think that there's no question that we are going through probably the biggest crisis that the world has gone through since World War II. And we need to reflect on how we got here and where we're going to go from here. And the crisis is not a single crisis, but it's a confluence of crises on top of each other. At the foundation is a public health crisis with more than 1.3 million dead worldwide by now and growing by the day. This has caused a deep economic crisis. There's some illusion that somehow if we keep things open, the economy will continue to hum along, but obviously this is a fallacy. As long as people are dying, cannot go back to normal. In the United States, we're also living through a social crisis, and the political crisis is unrolling in front of our eyes. And one question one may ask is, how did we get here? Why were we caught so underprepared for a crisis of this scale? And some would argue that this may have been like a black swan, you know, some event you cannot just predict. But you go back and you find out, you know, as you start doing research, you find out this is from May 25, 2006. The Secretary of Health and Human Services under the George W. Bush administration is giving testimony to the US Senate on Special Committee on Aging, preparing for the pandemic flu. So it's not as if we were not warned about it. There have been ample warning about the possibility of a pandemic. Yet we were caught unready. And why is that? And that inspired William Galston, an economist from the Brooklyn Institute, to write a column in March of this year, where he posed the dichotomy between resilience and efficiency. And he pointed out, he said, what if the relentless pursuit of efficiency, which has dominated American business thinking for decades, has made the global economic system more vulnerable to shocks? And the point is, the efficiency means that you are optimally adapted to the current environment, and resilience requires the capacity to adapt to disruptive changes. So if we focus too much on efficiency, it comes at the expense of resilience. And there has been, for example, the Wall Street Journal has been running a sequence of articles over the last few months called the COVID storms. And one of them was why were hospitals so underprepared? Why did COVID overwhelm hospitals? And the answer, a years-long drive for efficiency. Health systems have kept a tight rein on employee numbers and expanded outpatient care, helping their finances but making them less prepared for the medical crisis. And we know that a part of the huge toll in death from COVID-19 happening in nursing homes. And what happened there? Well, cost cutting at American nursing home made COVID-19 even worse. Industry could have done much more to stop the virus. So focus on efficiency came at the expense of resilience. But this is not just, we can't just look at the business community. I mean, this is partly even I can talk at length about in computing what happened. But one example, and of course, computing and business cannot be completely decoupled. Much of what's happening in computing today happening by huge industry that is profit motivated. But Al Spector pointed out to me that the Boeing 737 MAX is a beautiful example, because what happened there, Boeing came up with the idea of using new engines, more fuel efficient engines, but use an old airframe, again, to save money. Now that created an unstable instability, which is no problem. We will have a system, IoT, sense, act, and will stabilize the airplane. But that system depended on one sensor. So when that one sensor gave faulty signals, 2 airplane crashes, and only yesterday I read in a paper that finally the 737 MAX has been reapproved by the FAA for flight. It cost Boeing billions of dollars and the reputation. It will take them years to recover from that. So again, it was efficiency at the expense of safety and resilience. And you can see it at what happened in our economic. We have an economic system that especially going back to Milton Friedman 97 article, that the social responsibility of corporation is to make profits, to make money. And we have growing inequality. And in a recent article in Times Magazine, Nick Hanover, who himself is a billionaire, pointed out, when you look at how much inequality has shifted since 1975, for example, it corresponds to a $50 trillion transfer of income from the bottom 90%. The bottom 90% is the vast majority of Americans to the top 1%. And it gave us, again, it came at the expense of resilience. It gave us a society that left very precarious stage. And one of the pictures you have seen is hundreds and hundreds of cars, people waiting for hours to get food from food banks. This is the Houston Food Bank had to double its distribution, and they give £1 million of food daily in the spring. So again, we left American society in a very precarious state because of this pursuit of efficiency. Now, one thing did work and is working throughout COVID-19, This is the internet. I mean, here we are I'm sitting at my, we're all sitting at home and we're having this workshop. I mean, a year ago, this would have been almost inconceivable that this time we'll do something like this. And what enabled it? What enabled it is a key design principle of the internet that was supposed to survive a Soviet nuclear attack to enable us to have mutual destruction and counterattack. And this idea of redundancy, which of course flies against efficiency, is an old idea in computing. I at least in my mind, at least it goes back to error correcting code in the mid 40s, maybe earlier. I'd love to find an example where it's earlier. We now understand that if you want, for example, the financial system to be resilient, you need redundancy of capital. So redundancy, which is again the antithesis of efficiency, is something that we have neglected. So in summary, I think we need to wake up that when we have a society that is focused so much on efficiency, we neglect resilience. This happened in economics, but also in computing. I think it's not that we don't know about fault tolerance, but I think we need to broaden the thing about resilience more broadly. And just as a teaser for further discussion, markets and people are very bad at preparing for either low probability or very long-term events. For example, low probability, well, very often people buy car insurance because the law requires them. I cannot renew the registration of my car unless I have car insurance. And why do they do that? Otherwise, many people will not buy car insurance. And of course, many of us realize that COVID-19 may be just a dress rehearsal for a bigger challenge, climate change. And again, we know that markets do not prepare us for such long-term events that are not long-term anymore. So resilience, resilience, resilience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moshe, and admirably on time. So we do have time for one or two quick questions before we move on, but I know there was a question, I think, left over from the last time from the rather brave new world sounding 835401, which I understand is a real person. But I don't know if your question was for Edward or for Moshe, or whether you'd want to hang on to it.
Well, I had a question for Edward Lear.
Okay, we'll come back to that later. Keep your
Okay.
question. Are there any other quick questions for Moshe before we move on? And I suppose I do have a question. I mean, we hear a lot of, these days about the importance of adopting principles like privacy by design. Could we adapt that and think about resilience by design? And what would that look like in a computer system? You're muted.
Something started ringing in my ear suddenly. Could you repeat the question quickly? I'm sorry.
Okay, and it might have been the drilling in my house next door. Is the question of whether there are parallels between the discussions that we have a lot about trying to do privacy by design with certain kinds of computer systems. Can we learn something from that to think about resilience by design? And what would resilience by design look like?
Well, what we did learn now by privacy and security, and that if we say, let's build a system and let's come at the end and add some security and add privacy at the end, every time we have done it, we have discovered that it doesn't work. And it's time for us to kind of take the learn from, let's say, the Hippocratic oath. First, do no harm. I mean, start thinking about this kind of negative property. These are not features. It's how to sell. I know, for example, automobiles. I know one car that sells on safety, and that's Volvo. All the other cars just match government regulation. So we have to start thinking. We have to dictate baseline for design on privacy, on safety, on resilience, because this is classical what I would call market failures. I mean, preparing for such low probability events, market will say we'll take our chances, but the consequences to society are so harmful that we have to say no. You must buy car insurance. We need to think of privacy by design, safety by design, resilience by design. Now, it's not as if we know how to do all of these things. It's partly incumbent on us, the computer scientists, to start thinking, how do we, what does, even resilience, what does it really mean? It means different things to different people. So we need to take, and privacy is the same issue. And the reason people, in fact, did not want to build privacy, they say, oh, it depends on application. But now we understand there are building blocks that we must build into our system, and we need to do it for I would say that the new 3 R's, you know, the old 3 R's were reading, writing, and arithmetics. My new 3 R's are resilience, robustness, and reliability.
Okay, so can I make a quick comment about this, Sally? There's this whole field in engineering about fault-tolerant systems and fault-tolerant system design. So it's not, this resilience by design is not a new problem, and it's a fairly well-studied problem.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. We'll now move to our third speaker, Eric Massenet from the Milestones Chair of Sustainability Science for Emerging Technologies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And he focuses on energy and sustainability modeling of information communication technology systems and industrial systems. He was previously head of the Energy Demand Technology Unit at the International Energy Agency, I guess in the United States, an associate professor of mechanical and chemical engineering at Northwestern University in the US, and a staff scientist at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And at the moment, I think he's doing something that's extremely important, focusing on the energy evolution of the world's data centers. So Eric, the screen is yours.
Sorry, I was muted there. Thank you very much, Sally, for the kind introduction. And I do have some slides to share, because I wanted to share some data and some numbers. So as Sally mentioned, I'm a technology analyst, an energy systems and technology analyst. And I was asked to comment on the broader issue of how sustainable are these digital systems that we rely upon more and more every day. And I have to say, I'm really pleased to join the conversation, because I don't always get the chance to talk about broader, talk with people who understand the broader societal implications of these systems, their implications for privacy, their implications for well-being, how resilient these systems need to be. But I wanted to start with, asking a question that's on a lot of people's minds these days, which is digitalization a sustainable trend, or is it unsustainable? And for people like me who have been studying these systems for a while, we're asked this question quite often. And, this question is as old as the internet itself. And since, the early days of the internet, there have been projections that, due to the energy intensive nature of data centers, of personal computers, of network transmissions, that, as we consume more and more of these services, that the energy use and emissions and other impacts will invariably rise quite rapidly, and we'll face kind of a doomsday scenario. And, the first such projections like this trace back more than 20 years to this article in 1999 in Forbes, which got a lot of attention. Dig more coal, the PCs are coming. And the prediction was that the connected system would consume about half of US electricity within the next decade. That would have been about 2010. And clearly that didn't happen. But this perception that the internet or our digital lives are very energy and carbon intensive and are growing rapidly is pretty persistent. So, I pulled a few recent headlines. We track these stories. We track the analyses behind some of these efforts. Data centers gobbling up a lot of the world's energy, Bitcoin mining on track to consume all the world's energy by 2020. Streaming is a really unsustainable activity that could be costing us the Earth. This series just came out about a week ago on Channel 4, reinforcing that notion. And Sally, you mentioned an article that came across my desk too just yesterday. It's making its way in the news cycle again about the carbon footprint of email. And it's, this is becoming more and more the common perception about our digital lives, that they're highly carbon intensive, they're unsustainable, and we need to do something about it. And it's really logical to see where these perceptions are coming from. We all know that we're spending a lot more time online. We have many more devices in our lives. Here are projections from Cisco showing that potentially within the next 5 years, we could have 30 billion connected devices worldwide. That's a staggering number, and probably more than that when the world gets increasingly interconnected. The amount of data that's been created over the past decades has been a tremendous amount, and it's projected to increase by a factor of more than 5 in the next 5 years. All that data needs to be sent around through networks, stored in storage devices, and so forth, which has implications for e-waste. So we all get the sense that we're consuming more and more digital services. We're using more and more devices, and it's natural to think that that must lead to a substantially quick rise in emissions and energy use globally. And those of us who study the technology side, what are the technology systems that provide these services? We tend to come up with a slightly different view. So it's clear that demand for services is rising, and it will continue to rise. And we can see that here in the upper part of this graph, right? More storage, more workloads, more connections, more servers, and so forth. We're focusing on data centers here. But if you drill down into what's happening at the data center level and the server level and the storage level, those technologies, those operations have become a lot more efficient over the last decade. So we have this countervailing effect where energy efficiency improved operations are balancing out the increase, counterbalancing against an increase in demand. And what we found in our most recent paper is even though global workloads in data centers have increased by a factor of 6, global energy use has likely only risen by around 10%, maybe a little more coming from other analysts, but it's nowhere near, a 6-fold increase in energy demand to meet a 6-fold increase in demand for data center services. So studying the technology view, and we see this across the end use appliances as well. So how do we interact with the internet in our homes and businesses? Well, we use smartphones, we use tablets, we use PCs, we use displays, and so forth. These are data from the United States, from Fraunhofer and MIT, showing that in the US, this is US households. Going to the left, we clearly have many more devices than we had 15 years ago, but the energy consumption of each device has been steadily dropping thanks to technology innovation. And the overall net effect has been we're more connected, we're consuming more, but our end user devices are actually using less energy than they did 15 years ago. And those who study the overall impact of the internet, these are data from Jens Malmodin at Ericsson Research. He has arguably the best real world data set, measured data on the energy use of these systems. His work is showing that even though global data traffic has more than tripled, there's only been a slight uptick in the energy use of all of our connected devices, the networks and the data centers, that provide digital services. And we were all a bit worried about COVID. We're all spending more time online, we're Zooming, we're watching more Netflix and so forth. But there's real data coming from the system showing that the energy impacts of all that increased data consumption have been fairly minimal. So the network operators in Europe in May, early days of COVID, reported a surge in data traffic, no surprise there, with basically flat energy use in the networks. And we can talk about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. What it means is that there's a steady fixed load in the network that we're using regardless of data traffic, but it also allows us to absorb a lot of traffic with not a lot of additional energy investment. So this is the good news regarding the sustainability of the digital system. And we also have to think about how do these devices substitute for other services we would have normally consumed. So this is an infographic from a recent paper by colleagues at YASA looking at the potential for dematerialization in the global energy system and how digitalization plays a role. And, you can look on the left. Today's smartphones are quite energy efficient, right? 5 watts of operational power, 2.5 watts of standby power. But the functionality we get from these devices, many of us don't have video cameras or digital cameras anymore. We may be watching more content. It serves as a telephone. It serves as a radio. If you add up the energy footprint of all of those services we still consume, but would have otherwise had to consume through the old devices, the energy footprint is staggeringly larger, 449 watts of power consumption. Those services are now provided through 5 watts of smartphone consumption. So moving forward, though, we were asked a lot about where is this system going? And the best infographic I could come up with was this idea of a counterbalance. On the left-hand side, we have, continued progress in technological efficiency and so forth, and I'll unpack that a bit more. And on the right-hand side, we have clear trends for consuming more digital services, artificial intelligence, more connections, population growth, more consumption, 5G data traffic. These are all real trends that are pushing data demand up quite rapidly. And we also have to think about, rebound effects and induced demand. And really, the challenge moving forward is how do we balance this? How do we meet the needs of the increasing digital needs of our population, while making sure that the energy use, the emissions, the impacts of the system don't spiral out of control? And I've slightly tilted this balance because we've been monitoring and detecting that efficiency progress has been great, but it hasn't been enough to offset growing demand. Energy use is ticking up, but there is significant bandwidth left in the system, the existing systems, we think, to keep drastic energy use and emissions at bay, at least in the near term. So, computing technology still has sufficient bandwidth for efficiency improvements. Data centers, we know we could operate them more efficiently. Network technology is becoming more efficient. A big sort of overlooked opportunity is the efficiency of the software, and especially as relates to AI. So this is a graph from a paper that came out in one of the Nature series, I think for astrophysics, showing the growing trend towards using scripted languages in that field. So a lot of people are using Python versus compiled languages. And what this graph shows is that, the scripted languages take a lot more time to run. They're a lot more energy and carbon intensive than the compiled languages. So, there's bandwidth here to address some of this let's say, software overhead in some of the algorithms and programming that we're increasingly doing to focus more on efficient software, efficient programming language to bring that energy footprint down over time. That's just one example of the bandwidth that may exist out there for software and algorithms. And what I'm going to argue before wrapping up is we really need to take a close view at the net systems effects. And I realize this graph is probably way too small for you to see on your screens at home, but it's a recent review paper that's essentially a meta study looking at various opportunities for digitalization, and what the literature and empirical data are showing are the net effects at the energy system level. So I've pulled out some smart technologies for the home. Edward mentioned he has a smart thermostat in his master bathroom. Overwhelmingly, the literature is showing that real data, modeled scenarios, that these digital innovations save energy in most cases, but there is the danger that they could lead to more demand, rebound effects, and so forth. And we need to be cognizant of that. And if anyone's interested in the paper or the data, please email me afterward. I recognize it's probably tough to see here, but what you're seeing here on these bars is net savings versus net increases in either emissions or energy use. But we do have to keep in mind that digital services make consumption a lot more efficient. They lower the cost, they lower the barriers to consuming. And there is quite a real concern about if we continue to digitalize, what will that mean for consumption? And one key example is autonomous vehicles. These haven't quite arrived yet like we thought they would, but they're coming. And, it could go one of two ways. There are some benefits here to autonomous vehicles on the left side of this graph. Eco-driving, sending the right vehicle for the right size audience and so forth. But if it means that the barrier to, being in a car, the hassle factor, the opportunity cost is much lower, because now, in the morning, I can drink coffee and catch up on email while my autonomous vehicle drives me to work. I may live farther away from work, and we may see a net increase in overall energy use and in driving activity. So these are the all important rebound and induced effects that we need to be cognizant of when it comes to digitalization. And lastly, I'll say that we always have to keep this in perspective. So this is a graph from the World in 2050 initiative from colleagues at YASA, showing all of the various ways that digitalization can bring societal benefit to, education, healthcare, smart cities, more efficient food systems and so forth, energy systems integration. So when we think about the impacts of digitalization, in terms of energy, resources, carbon emissions, it's important to take into account all the social benefits we can get from these systems. And in fact, one sort of safety valve that digital systems have is they're largely run on electricity, and they can both increase our ability to adopt renewable energy, but run on renewable energy themselves. And a lot of big players in the ICT industry are already committing to more renewables, net zero initiatives, and so forth. And it's really this perspective we need to keep in mind. There will always be impacts, but do the benefits outweigh those impacts? And for digitalization, it's a complicated story. So no doubt, digitalization has brought many, many benefits to quality of life and well-being around the world. And there's no doubt that we're consuming more and more of these services and that we'll continue to consume more and more of these services moving forward. But the data and the analyses have shown that historically, we haven't quite reached this doomsday scenario, right? We've seen a lot more use of digital systems, but proportionally, the amount of additional energy, carbon, and resource has been much smaller than the increases we're getting in the services provided by these systems. And a real world experiment we're all living now is COVID-19. There's, newfound worry about emails and virtual meetings and so forth. But if we take a step back and look at the energy balance and the carbon balance in 2020, we can see that transportation emissions are way down with a slight uptick in residential electricity use. And we're not seeing that being online all the time is moving us in the wrong direction. It's actually what we're doing now is saved a lot of travel. And we're seeing that in the official energy statistics. It's important to focus on net effects. And then lastly, I'm the first to admit that we need a lot better data, we need a lot better monitoring systems, and a lot more research to truly understand the impacts of this complex evolving system over time. Information technology changes rapidly. How we use those technologies changes arguably even more rapidly. And it's really difficult to pin down the impacts of these systems in real time due to many, many data gaps. And the world needs to get better at collecting those data, analyzing these systems, and probably having better policies so we can maintain a balance moving forward. So with that, I'll wrap up and look forward to questions and the discussions.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you to all speakers for your brilliant timekeeping. Before we open up the general discussion, and Mr. 835401 is first to do that. But in the interest of fairness and balance, any quick questions? Quick question for Eric. I think there's a very kind of thought-provoking discussion about, how we kind of balance these things.
I have, Sally, this is Enrico.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a very quick question for Eric, which is related to the efficiency of languages for software development. It seems to me that the most important cost item is not just the time to market. I mean, how much time you require to go to market with the first release, but is the cost for maintenance of software. And I think probably the scenario for the most efficient languages in terms of maintenance would be different.
Yeah. It's a very good point. Thank you for raising it. And I think part of the reason we have, that's a really good point about the sort of market drivers for the current paradigm. The other, theory about software becoming less and less efficient over time is that we haven't been really constrained by computational power. It's been growing quite rapidly. So it's no longer the constraint that it was, let's say 30 years ago, to have really efficient software. And that example I showed was kind of a unique one. It was, in the astrophysics community, large scale simulations and the languages used. But it was illustrative of this bandwidth that we have, not only in the way we, construct our software to be as most efficient as possible, but whether we use scripted or compiled languages and the choice of the right kind of approach for different problem sets. There seems to be significant bandwidth there to reduce energy and computational intensity. That is, we're just scratching the surface on.
Great, thank you very much. So, Julian, you've been waiting very patiently, so you can kick off the general discussion.
Julian Niederrümelin from Munich, philosopher there. I have a question for Edward Lee. So your contribution was quite philosophical. And for me, digital humanism is primarily about the role of human agency in a digitalized world. And therefore, your ideas about the role of AI is quite at the core of our debate. So there is something what is called in philosophy Californian semantics. This is John Searle and many others. And if they are right, and I think they are right, then there is no agency without intentionality. And all what is involved in intentionality, motivation, reasons, deliberating reasons, and so on and so forth. But what you described very adequately is, it seems to me, only a form of simulating self-consciousness or self-evaluating processes. This is a simulation, but not a realization. If it were a realization, we should stop AI development, because then we are indeed in the role of God and invent persons. So a little bit rude and a little bit absolutistically formulated, but I'm interested to hear what you say to that.
So you're addressing very deep issues, and in fact, these two books that I wrote that Sally mentioned are very much about these issues. And I think that there's a couple of high-level points that I'd like to make. One is that when many people think of computation, they're thinking of kind of the Turing Church model of computation, and they make they draw a mistaken conclusion, which is that computation is somehow universal, that everything that is realizable by machines can be realized by computation. And my first book argues quite vehemently that that's not the case. Okay, that computation is nowhere near as universal as we think. But that doesn't mean necessarily that machines are not universal. In fact, in both of these books, I take a very materialistic stance where I assume that the human brain is a machine, that it is in fact everything that it does is a consequence of the physics of how it works and interacts with its environment. That's an assumption that I take. And from that assumption, it's evidently true that machines can achieve the things that we value so highly: our consciousness, our sense of self, our sense of agency, our ability to form cultures, and so forth. Under that premise of materialism, it's clearly possible for machines to do that. So the question becomes, what would those machines look like? And is it possible for our digital technologies to evolve into machines that have a capacity for some form of agency? And I look at things like, these simple nervous systems in worms and point out that they are, in fact, able to distinguish self from non-self, which is a basic prerequisite. And that is what drives the evolutionary process that leads eventually to the agency that humans have. And we already see those kinds of mechanisms in machines and in computing machines, in fact. And one of the things that enables it in computing machines is, in fact, the feedback through the physical world that I was talking about. The ability to sense and act to sense in the physical world is a game changer, because that is no longer in the realm of Turing Church computation. Turing Church computation is not interactive, and it doesn't engage with the physical world. So, we're seeing the technology moving towards a really sort of more fundamentally powerful kind of set of mechanisms.
Do you want to respond to that, Julian, or are there other questions?
I would indeed like to, because but we don't have the time to discuss this all over. So the primary point is whether we ascribe intentionality to software systems. And without this ascription, all similarities don't help on my account. It's not about computation, it's about intentionality. And so if we ascribe intentionality, then indeed the whole game changes. Yeah? So this is the prerequisite for action, for agency. A worm doesn't act in that sense, has no agency. Some highly developed animals have it, and I think humans obviously have it, but this doesn't tell, you cannot deduce from that if something look as if it has intentionality. So, and this is, I think, neutral to the question of materialism or non-materialism.
So one of the more technical arguments in my more recent book is that there are certain things that humans do, our consciousness, our intentionality, that may be fundamentally not observable externally, and that for actually rather deep technical reasons. So I actually developed some foundational arguments that are based on things like the Shannon channel capacity theorem, which talks about the ability to communicate information over noisy channels. I talk about zero knowledge proofs, which show that interactive systems can do things that objective observational systems cannot do. And I look at Robin Milner's observations about automata, that if you look at them objectively as an observer, they're indistinguishable. But when you interact with them, you can distinguish them. And so the book goes into rather deeply what a first person engagement means, that what is first person, okay? And it goes against, I think, a lot of sort of 20th century dogma that scientific study needs to be objective. Never engage with the subject, let the data speak for itself. That's an extremely limiting perspective. And I show technical arguments for why this is an extremely limiting argument. And the conclusion that I draw is that if we ever create machines that have some form of consciousness, we will never be able to tell for sure that they have that. It will be fundamentally not something that we can prove in any objective way.
Okay, I see there's some
this
more.
is a quick comment. It's a quick comment. This is something that philosophers have studied. It's called, I think, an article I saw years ago called "Conversation with a Zombie." You know, can you tell the difference between a human being which is conscious and a zombie that simulates that but is not conscious? And it's not clear how you distinguish between the two.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you're interested in technical reasons why it may be impossible to tell the difference, I can offer some.
Right. I think, fascinating as this is, I think there's another question from Enrico. Is that right, Enrico?
Yes, yes. Sorry, actually, I have one quick comment to what Edward Lee said about the computational model. I'm not an expert in the field, but some time ago I've read about some extension of the computational model to model the unbounded process and the interaction that happens in the current world where we have a machine interacting over the internet and never being shut down. And so I think that I mean, in this, I don't know whether you are aware about these works that were made by Van Leuven and Widerman in the Netherlands. So this might be interest for you to know. But this was just a comment. Actually, my question is to Moshe about something he said, speaking about resilience. And he said, first, do not harm, which I much share as an attitude to produce digital systems that do not bring us in a bad situation. But on the other side, this first do not harm might be an obstacle to research development. And we have seen that for what regards artificial intelligence, on the two sides of the oceans, Europe and the United States are taking different approach to research in artificial intelligence, where Europe appears to be more prudent, while in the United States seems to be more, let's say, aggressive. I mean, or more liberal, if I can use this term. So, what do you think, Moshe, about this? How to combine the freedom of research and the quest of human beings for knowledge with these first do not harm principles?
Well, I mean, the issue here is not, I don't think the issue is the freedom of research. It actually connects to the questions that I want to ask Edward. So let me kind of raise the issue and answer you at the same time. we have been so worried about the rise of the machine, so to speak, which is still at this point a far out possibility, I would say, that we did not notice what's happening in front of our eyes is the rise of the corporation. If you look at the world that we have now, the issue is not that we've done the research. The issue is we have deployed technology in the real world. You know, we had the attitude, deploy first, see the consequences later. I mean, we have run this experiment. Okay, think of what Facebook is doing. This is running kind of an experiment. We are living with the consequence of this experiment now. And to me, that is right now the part of the real issue is, I would say, is technology is driving the future, but who is doing the steering? And if you look now what's happening, I would say the steering is done by large tech corporations. That's what's happening now. And that I think we need to worry more about, because this drives the direction of society. And we are, you know, I'm looking at Stuart Russell, a colleague of Edward, the brilliant guy. When I look at, he's worried about the machines and alignment of values. And while we're doing this, corporations are not aligned with our values. I mean, if you want a value alignment, let's worry about value alignment as society and corporations. And that's, to me, where we need to, and so the issue is not freedom of research. The issue is, if you've done the research, should we just let you deploy the technology? And the United States has said, yes, go ahead, deploy technology, we'll see the consequences later. Europe said, wait a minute, let's think of the consequences first. And I mean, the US is paying the price. You know, our society is now breaking up to a large extent because of technology, because we have not taken the what's called the precautionary principle to heart. Let's think of the consequences first before we deploy these systems.
So I was just going to say that as it reminded me of, you know, it's a kind of contrast between the philosophy of move fast and break things versus the precautionary principle. There's another question waiting. Christos Tsoukanos, sorry for my mispronunciation.
Yes, thank you, Sally. So my question is actually inspired on the response of Moshe to your question, which also Enrico mentioned. So last week, something funny happened to everyone on an Apple computer, so they could not open any program. This revealed that Apple was sending information about every program you open to the mothership, and there was a bug at the server and programs did not open for everyone. So not only anyone listening was getting a bunch of private metadata in this case, but also the overall system functionality did not work. So the additional business logic that was introduced for whatever purpose made the system worse. So can we draw a correlation of do not harm, privacy and resilience? Thank you.
Edward?
Yeah, I just want to comment on that. You know, a corporation is a cultural phenomenon. It's a shared fiction among humans, right? It's not a physical artifact. It's an organizational mechanism, and it's hard to ascribe it independent agency. I mean, the U.S. Supreme Court has done that, actually. It says, you know, corporations are people too, basically. But in what sense does it have agency? I mean, if you look at it, you know, we were talking about the question of whether machines could have agency. Can a shared fiction have agency? That's a little hard to get my head around.
But going back to the point that Julian made earlier, that I would argue that corporations certainly have intentionality.
Yes.
It depends. I mean, maybe that depends very much on how you spell intentionality, right? There's two spellings, right? There's the intentionality meaning intention, and then there's the John Searle type of intentionality, which is the ability to form a mental model of the world around you. Okay, it's what Daniel Dennett has a friendlier word for it. He calls it aboutness. Okay, and Searle has argued, as Julian pointed out, that that is a feature of human cognition that he argues is not replicable in computers. And I think his argument is very convincing for Turing church machines, but it's not, that argument does not broaden, and I don't think Searle even claims that it broadens to machines in general.
I think probably our last question will be from Hannes Wertner.
Thank you. I didn't find the button for raising my hand, so even as a moderator, I have problems doing that. Sorry. Now, I have a very concrete question to Eric. Thanks, Eric, for your excellent presentation. But I heard different numbers on the machine learning and blockchain effects, and you didn't mention that. You spoke about connectivity, devices, let's say. Do you have numbers? Because there are these famous quotes on machine learning and energy usage, as well as the blockchain, nearly rising demand.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so let me take blockchain first. So blockchain received a lot of attention, mostly for Bitcoin, because it's a very energy and computationally intensive algorithm, a proof of work algorithm used for Bitcoin. And early projections were that it would consume loads and loads of energy because Bitcoin was, starting to take off. Since then, though, it's sort of leveled off, and really the best numbers come from Cambridge University that I've seen. They have even an online calculator. If anyone's interested, you can just Google CBECI. It's the Bitcoin Energy Consumption Index, and it's looking like it's around 70. Well, I forget the exact number. You can find it there. It is a concern, and one of the reasons I didn't mention it is it's been kind of outside the traditional internet collection of technologies. It's kind of a very specialized application, but it is a concern. But there are also algorithms and technology efficiency levers that can make blockchain a lot more sustainable, less energy intensive, less carbon intensive. So again, the key here is existing systems can change, and there's bandwidth and innovation that can help push those systems to a more sustainable operating point. With respect to machine learning and artificial intelligence, absolutely, there's a lot of concern about just the sheer computational intensity of model training. And some early estimates suggest that can leave quite a large energy and potentially carbon footprint. We don't really know how it's going to evolve over time because there's some bandwidth there we're seeing to improve the algorithmic efficiency, or once we train a model, perhaps it's not as energy intensive to apply it. And we don't yet know. There's a lot of people studying, ways of making that process more computationally efficient, mostly because it's so computationally costly now, and not everyone has access to all that computational horsepower. But we need to monitor it better, absolutely. And the question I always ask is if, we have to also look at the societal benefits. If we're expending more energy, but we're able to provide much better healthcare, we're able to optimize supply chains, we're able to control energy use, we always have to consider this net balance, right? It's always about a trade-off. And I'll just close by saying it's probably one of the big research questions in my field is what will be the future implications of machine learning and artificial intelligence? What do we know and what don't we know? And how can we, identify what that bandwidth looks like for keeping energy and emissions in check, but making sure that we get net societal benefit from those applications? It's a complex topic.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I think we have to end there. It is pretty much 5:15. I'd just like to, on behalf of everyone present, thank all three of our speakers for their very thought-provoking contributions, which I think certainly stimulated an interesting conversation and debate. So thank you all very much. I'll hand back to Hannes in case there are any final practical and organizational issues.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you to the panelists. We have a break now of 15 minutes. We start again at 5:30. Thanks for the applause, Sharon. There's the possibility to give a virtual, real applause to the panelists. Thank you all for your contributions. Thanks for reminding me, Carlo. Shachar, also Carlo is here. We meet again at 5:30 on the panel of international initiatives. And we keep the system running, but we will have a coffee and then we meet back at 5:30. Thanks. See you again. So welcome back at 5:30 at point. We are now starting with our second panel, and Carlo will introduce the participants. I would like to shortly introduce Carlo, but he's well known. He has been professor, he's now a professor emeritus at the Politecnico di Milano, and he worked there for over 40 years in teaching and research. He's a fellow of the ACM and IEEE. He's also a member of the Accademia Europea and the member of the Italian Academy of Science. So his work is well recognized. He received the ACM SIGSOFT Award for Outstanding Research, and he has also been president of Informatics Europe for 4 years, I think. He is well known for his research in software engineering and programming languages, and he has published over 200 papers and co-authored 6 books. And Carlo is with us because he is interested in ethical implications of research in informatics, but in informatics general. As such, he is also currently chairing the ethics committee of the Politecnico di Milano. Carlo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hannes. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Okay, so welcome to all participants in this last workshop on international initiatives towards humanistic digital future. That's the title of the panel. So welcome to the speakers who will present in the panel, and all of you who are sitting comfortably in your homes. Although this may be seen as a gift that is given to us by technology, being able to participate in this event remotely, sitting comfortably in your homes, still, we miss the opportunity of being together, seeing each other face to face, and collaborate and discuss more. But we have to live with this, at least in these difficult times. I also wish to thank Hannes and the Vienna group for organizing this event and enthusiastically supporting these initiatives around digital humanism that I think are very, very important. The panel that we have today now is a nice continuation of the discussions we had throughout the workshop. Yesterday, for example, in the panel on education, we discussed the implications of digital humanism on education. And on several occasions also, we spoke about the need for our research, as we do research, to increasingly interact with the social science and humanities. However, I think that the change in paradigm in education and research is not an easy task for us. We all come from a tradition where education and research were encapsulated and still are encapsulated within strictly defined boundaries. Sometimes we call them silos. So I think that this panel actually discusses about some efforts that have been done to break the silos, to change, possibly the paradigm that we traditionally follow in education and in research. And the panel actually was put together to give you examples that are, quite different from each other. They have different goals, different ambition. We start from examples that sit within a single university to examples that are across universities, and discussions among, about possible cooperation with different initiatives like, the digital humanism and, other initiatives around the world. So I will give the floor to each member of the panel who will go for 10 to 15 minutes. I have to tell you that one of the panelists who was expected to be with us today, Michel Elam, who was going to present the Digital Society Research, the Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence at Stanford. Michel cannot be with us because they had, a fire evacuation alert. She is in California, and we know that they suffer from, these problems with fire these days. So regrettably, there will be a missing presentation from the US, actually describing an interesting initiative that is being held at Stanford. But I'm sure that, we can take up more about other initiatives also in the future. So this will only be a starting point for a discussion. And I hope that we can all benefit from the various initiatives that will be described. So I will give the floor to the first presenter, Viola Schiaffonati. Viola is an associate professor of logic and philosophy of science at Politecnico di Milano, so in a technical university, where she teaches computer ethics and philosophy of computer science. Her main research interests are the philosophical issues of artificial intelligence and robotics, epistemology and methodology of experiments in computer engineering and autonomous robotics, and analysis of ethical issues of intelligent and autonomous systems. She will talk to us about a META, which is an interdisciplinary group at Politecnico di Milano, and the relationships they have with new teaching initiatives and research in a technical university. Viola, the floor is for you.
Okay, good afternoon. Let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for this invitation. Let me just introduce a little bit a possible way of translating the idea of moving in the direction of a humanistic digital future. And the particular example I'm going to present is META, which is a group of people from different disciplines, in particular from the humanities and social sciences. It's a small group in a technical university. And this group has an expertise in the philosophical, ethical, social issues related to science, technology, and engineering. I want to stress the importance of this name, because meta means comes from Greek and means reflecting on. So it's a group of people from the humanities and from the social sciences reflecting on technology, science, engineering, and innovation. So let me focus first. I will discuss education, research, and outreach activities that we have organized both within Politecnico and in a larger context. But let me start with education. Let me start with education because I think this is really a central key point in the direction of digital humanistic future. And of course, this also relates to the panel, the first panel yesterday on educating for a humanistic digital future. And let me introduce the key point of our project. The key point is to educate future reflective professionals. Politecnico di Milano is a large technical university, and basically students are mostly in the engineering sciences, but also in architecture and design and industrial design. So our goal is to complement the traditional education they have and to try to inject in a sort of sense this kind of reflective ability. So this means that we want to educate future professionals that are aware of the philosophical, ethical, and social issues of science and technology. So this does not mean to educate people, students that have to become experts in philosophy or in ethics, okay? But they have to be aware of these problems, because this is a challenge that we guess that in the future will be very important for them to be able to be aware of these problems and to be able to collaborate and have a dialogue with experts in the fields of philosophy, ethics, and social sciences. Then, of course, this is a long process. We start some years ago, and there are there's still, unfortunately, some form of skepticism with this project. Let me just mention two examples. The first is usually the idea that you can be rigorous only when you deal with numbers and formulas and equations. So our goal is to show that, of course, you can reach high level of rigor also when you deal with qualitative reasoning, for example. And another problem usually is that, of course, when we want to add new contents, new courses, sometimes we have to eliminate some of the old contents or the old courses, and this can create some conflicts. But so far, basically, if we focus on teaching, we have introduced some courses in the humanities and in the social sciences, mostly to master and doctoral students. And what is interesting to stress is that these courses are of two different types. Most of them are what we call standalone courses. Courses, you can see there just some examples, some titles: ethics for technology, computer ethics, critical thinking. And usually these courses are taught by professionals in philosophy, in the social sciences, in ethics. But then we have introduced also a more ambitious idea, and we call them integrated courses. These are courses that have two instructors usually, and one of the instructor comes from the humanities and the social sciences, the other comes from the engineering sciences. And the idea is to start to discuss a problem and to see the same problem from different perspectives: the social sciences, the humanities from the one side, and the more technical and engineering from the other side. And this is, I think, one important element of our project, and we are pushing in this direction. So let me just summarize some strengths and also some open issues of this, our project in education. We are very optimistic in a sense. And one of the reasons why we are very optimistic with this project is that all of us are people, we are humanists and social scientists that work within this technical university. So this makes a big difference, and I will say more on that later. And so this is one of our strengths. The second possibility, and I think it's very important, is that we have a large, let's say, a context in which we can experiment at the doctoral level. And this is very important, and it's also a context in which we have, for example, connection with other important technical universities in Europe, like, for example, Idea League. And we organize different initiatives, and these initiatives sometimes are very important, not only for the doctoral students, but they also can be translated, for example, for master students. We are organizing this year a big doctoral school on the ethics of science and technology for the doctoral students of these Idea League universities. And I think this is a project in which we are learning also something that we will translate in the future to our master students. let's discuss just a little bit about the problems. One problem for sure is that we haven't addressed yet students at the bachelor level. And this is really a critical issue in a sense, because so far our courses in the humanities and social sciences are electives. So does it make sense to have some mandatory courses for bachelor students? And this is, I guess, one of the open issues, and we don't still have a clear answer on how to address this problem. Let me just focus now on research. And I think that here, the key question in research is to really understand how is it possible to promote a real integration between the humanities, the social sciences, and the engineering sciences. This is not easy, of course, as you know, but I think that we have, let's say, a kind of model at Politecnico di Milano, and I think we are moving in a promising direction, in a sense. And one key element of this model is that we are humanists and social scientists that are embedded in different departments. So the meta study, unit study that I was presenting at the beginning is just a group of people, but each of these people is working and living in a specific department. This is very different from other models, for example, other technical universities in Europe, in which usually they have a department for the humanists and social scientists, or some kind of institutional organization like interdepartmental center for the humanities and social scientists. Our model is different, but we think that this can make the difference sometimes. Because we are humanists and social scientists working already in collaboration with engineering, architecture, and design colleagues in our department. Then another important element, and we are moving also in this direction, and this is also very important, is that we need young scholars. We need to have more people, of course. We need to have new people and to cover new departments, because we are just about 10 people and we are not covering all the departments of Politecnico. But more than that, what is important is to have these young scholars that are able to integrate early in these departments. And this makes a difference, because if we consider education, so far education is still a little bit compartmentalized. Of course, also research has some issues, and I guess that the most important one is the complexity of interdisciplinarity. In theory, everybody agrees that interdisciplinarity is very important, but then what about the practice? Just to mention two examples, if we look at the schemes of funding or the venues for publication, still we see that interdisciplinarity is not recognized in practice as an important practice. And we think that to push this collaboration with colleagues from the humanities and social sciences, mostly in Europe, but not only in Europe, is very important, because we can share experiences, we can share models, we can share also best practices, and also we can push a little bit in the direction of promoting more interdisciplinarity. Just to present an example, we have this Idea League ethics working group. Politecnico di Milano is chairing this group. We have organized the doctoral school on ethics of science and technology I was mentioning, but then from the doctoral school also we are organizing a big research project, and so this shows how education and research are deeply connected. And just to mention, another important group at a European level is the Alliance for Tech. Let me conclude with a mention to the outreach activities that, of course, are playing a big role in our project, but in general in similar projects. And of course, as Meta, we are organizing like more traditional activities, seminar, workshop, conferences, lectures, and we address both an audience that is within Politecnico, but then also a larger audience. But here again, we try to be a little bit more creative. And so we try to, let's say, exploit the power of art regarding these issues. And we have a big project with the most important theater in Italy, which is Piccolo Teatro di Milano, and a play about the ethical impacts of technology. This play was planned for this winter, but unfortunately, due to COVID, we had to postpone next year, I guess next autumn. So let me just conclude. If we look at the future, I think that the most important question to address is, but why is this integration really important? What's the core of this integration? And of course, there are plenty of issues to discuss, but let me just focus on 4 issues that maybe if we have time, we can discuss later on. First of all is that it's very important both at the research level and education level to increase the critical abilities of students, of researchers, of scholars. And to do that is very important to include different perspectives, not only the technical perspectives, but of course the humanities, social sciences, history, they play a very important role in this. Second point is, of course, technology is not neutral. So if we want to avoid the ethical and social risk of these technologies, we have also to use the tools of the humanities and social sciences. Then we must push this collaborative model. And in particular, we need to increase this kind of model within the research system. And then also to look at the social commitments that universities have, in particular in this moment, towards their communities. So thank you very much, and hope that we will have time to discuss later.
Thank you very much, Viola, and thank you for pointing out that we have to do things that go beyond just introducing a few courses on ethics in our schools, but we have to go for real integration of these issues into our curricula as for teaching, and integration into research of these topics by collaborating closely in research projects. I would like, unless there's burning questions from the audience, to go around all the speakers and then open a discussion at the end. I don't see hands raised at this point, so I would move to the next presentation. And the next presentation is by Marcel Broersma. And Marcel is a professor and director of the Center for Media and Journalism Studies at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, and one of the national coordinators of the Digital Society Research Program in the Netherlands. And he's going to present the Digital Society Research Program, which is an interesting effort which involves 14 Dutch universities. The specific focus of Marcel in research is on digital literacy and inclusion, changing patterns of media use, and the digital transformation of journalism. Marcel, the floor is yours for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Carla. I'm going to try to share my screen. See if that works.
It's coming, yes.
I think it does. Now it's bigger, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to talk here about the Digital Society program of the Dutch universities. It's a quite remarkable initiative, I would say, because all 14 Dutch universities participate in this program that is organized by their association, the VSNU, the Association for Dutch University. So in this program, we have the technical universities in the Netherlands, which are 4 smaller, focused, specialized universities, and also the broad classic universities that actually embody all disciplines within academia. And of course, what we see on the national level is that, on many occasions, universities compete with one another about money and influence and so on and so forth. And in this case, they really collaborated, they really joined their forces and developed a research program. And that is also in the Dutch situation, in which there is traditionally quite a lot of collaboration between universities, quite special. They did so, I think, almost 3 years ago, which started with developing a research agenda together. So they brought together leading professors from all these universities who together collaboratively then developed a research program for the digital society to study transformations in the digital society. And I think one of the key issues underlining this program or this initiative was that the universities realized that digitalization in many aspects is a major challenge for our society, and that universities could really contribute to that, to studying these issues, but also engaging with societal stakeholders and try to think of solutions as well. So it's also an effort to connect academic research really to the political, social, economic developments in society. The other aim is that we often see, and I think Viola already talked about that, is that there's a divide between the social sciences and humanities on the one hand, the more technical disciplines on the other hand, the life sciences. And in this case, one of the other aims was to bring together all these disciplines, to let them collaborate in this big research program. Because I think everybody realizes that when we deal with these kinds of societal issues, these major issues, that we not only need the different stakeholders in society, but also the different academic disciplines on board. So together in this research program, these professors developed 7 thematic program lines that are headed by coordinators, and I will say a bit more about that later on. And all of this big national program is coordinated by the VSNU Bureau, so the Association of Dutch Universities. I think this is the main challenge, right? So digitalization is affecting all areas of human activities. So it's about politics, it's about citizenship in a digital society. It's about work. I think the COVID pandemic has, made transformations in work particularly visible for a lot of us. It has to do with the economy, with economic trends, has to do with healthcare, with e-health, also health prevention through digital means. So there's a lot of optimism usually for these developments. This morning I was in a conference in Göttingen about digitalization for a sustainable Europe. And then obviously there's also with politicians, there's a lot of hope and promise that digitalization will change the world for good. And I think there's quite some value in that, and it could indeed be helpful. But obviously it also comes with challenges, right? So Viola already mentioned quite a few of them, I think, that we need to talk about. questions about participations, responsibility, security, privacy, surveillance, and so on and so forth. And this means that it is, and then we get to this multidisciplinarity again. It is is of key importance to bring these disciplines into conversations, where on the one hand we have computer and data scientists, the whole move to AI, for example, in the Netherlands, which is pretty much going on at the moment, but also within Europe. But also, on the other hand, social scientists and humanities scholars studying the implications of digitalization for society. So by bringing them together, bringing these people into conversation, that might be helpful for developing solutions for the future. So in the Digital Society program, there are 7 research lines, and you see this beautiful illustration of the program here. And these include both the more computer science based lines like responsible data science and the safety and security line. It includes a more policy-based line, citizenship and democracy, but also lines that focus on the implications of digitalization for certain sectors in society. So health and well-being, for example, with a lot of colleagues involved from the life sciences, medical sciences, work and organization, learning and education, digital cities and communities. And altogether, these 7 research lines offer a pretty encompassing field of study of these transformations in society, we believe. And what we see is that within these research lines, professors from different universities collaborate. Every university contributed with professors and put them in these different research lines, but also funded research positions for postdoctoral fellows for all of these research lines. So it's connecting existing research, but also starting new research and starting new projects. We have well, this is basically how it's organized. So we have a steering committee with 2 rectors, vice chancellors of Dutch universities that report to all the universities. Then there are 3 program coordinators, Inot Lagendijk, Sally Wyatt, who's in the audience, I think, so she can join in later, maybe, if she likes, and myself. And then we're supported by the associations of Dutch universities. I think so getting to the objectives of the program is that we want to connect societal or research with societal needs. So really make that connection between academia and society in this societal challenge. So when it's a success, so these factors have been defined. So when there are more inter and multidisciplinary university positions, and Viola described that for the initiative in Milan. But the same thing is happening all over the Netherlands as well, where we try to bring in new people, but also connect the dots within the universities in new initiatives to bring these disciplines into conversation. And I think this national program is also instrumental in doing that. What we also want is a greater attention for digitalization and data science in all programs, right? So that ranges from the more technical faculties, engineering faculties, but also in healthcare, in the humanities and in the social sciences to really, bring this into the curricula of the academic programs. That also involves, obviously, an extension of methodological repertoires. And I think, well, linking up to what Viola has been told before, that not only includes data science in, for example, digital humanities programs, but also including ethics, philosophy, and so on and so forth, in the more technical programs. And what we also want to stimulate, and that's also happens quite naturally when you work together on such a project, is to work towards co-authored, co-referenced publications, and also new joint research projects. I think in the past years, already quite some new research applications and research programs have emerged from the Digital Society program. The second key objective is to promote a responsible digitalization with people at the core. And I think that is, a very important part of what we try to do, so that we really want to bring across that it is about human-centered technology and human-centered digitalization. So we try to feed that into the public debate, into the political debate, also in discussing with the ministries in the Netherlands. The Dutch government has been developing its own digital agenda in the last years, and we really try to chip in to that with the latest insights from academia. It also comes with more experimentation that we do, linking with societal stakeholders in programs that has to do with improved digital literacy, digital inclusion in society as well. And that brings me to the third point, is more collaboration, both within universities and with societal stakeholders. And I think after 2.5, 3 years of the program, that has already taken shape in many aspects, and is also one of the key successes of the program. So what we do in terms of activities, so I've been telling you that the universities created these newly funded 3-year positions for PhDs and postdocs. So we bring them together, young academics, junior research staff from different disciplines, different universities, to have monthly meetings to discuss their own research. And again, that has also led to research applications with people from different disciplines, but finding joint topics and joint questions within these sessions, and then turning that into research projects. But we also bring in international colleagues in these meetings and societal stakeholders, also to bring these new generations of researchers into contact, for example, with the ministries in the Netherlands. Already said a bit about these joint grant applications, societal engagement through Parliament, so agenda into that, which is very important in all kinds of discussions about how we organize and govern AI, for example, how evolve in public debate and in elections, for example. It has to do with all kinds of public and private partnerships that we are involved in, and all kinds of more academic networks that we try to tune into. I think maybe a last slide, because then time is up. I think one of the really great things that we've been doing in the past 2 years, and obviously in September we would have, or in November, so that's actually right now, we would have a third Digital Society conference, which is obviously not possible now due to the pandemic. But these digital societies are really big events, bringing together people from different groups, so academics, people from within the research program, within the research network, with all kinds of colleagues that are not involved as such in the program, but do research that is related to it. It brings in students that come in and participate in the conference. It brings in representatives from the government. It brings in all kinds of companies, for example, and other civil society stakeholders for a really exciting day in which these research lines, usually in collaboration also with societal stakeholders, present research projects, latest research insights, and that really helps to bring to move the conversation further. I think in the Netherlands, I think we're really happy to to have seen so much interest in this conference, and that it really works when you create such a national program that really focuses on one issue, brings together people from different disciplines and includes stakeholders, that it then also can really have a visible effect on all kinds of societal agendas. So I think that's more or less what I wanted to tell. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcel, for the interesting presentation of this initiative. Again, if there is no burning questions from the audience, and I don't see hands raised, we can move to the next one and then open a global discussion. Okay, so the next presentation is from Paul Timmers. Paul Timmers will present is a representative, of the Digital Enlightenment Forum, and he will provide a different viewpoint here. We have seen two cases within the academia, a single university, a set of university, a network of universities, and now we see an initiative that actually refers more to policymakers and instead of the education and research world directly. So Paul Timmers will present that. Paul is a research associate. Actually, he's an academic. He's a research associate at Oxford University for cybersecurity and digital transformation, and also an adjunct professor at the European University in Cyprus, and a visiting professor at the Yeka University, and advisor to the European Policy Center in Brussels. So he has an experience as in Brussels and relations with the European initiatives. So he will talk about the Digital Enlightenment Forum and the possible relationships that can arise, in conjunction with the digital humanism initiatives that we have been taking here. So, Paul, the floor is yours, and then we will open a discussion.
Thank you very much, Carlo. I hope that I come across loud. I don't need any slides, so I'll just talk. Congratulations to Hannes and the Vienna team, and also his committee that advised him on this event. It's super interesting, relevant. And I'm also very happy to be here in this session with Viola and Marcel, because they presented two initiatives that I would call, well, I find them really enlightening. And perhaps I better start actually with a little bit of an anecdote before I start talking about Digital Enlightenment Forum. And I need to take you back to 2014. I was a director at the European Commission until 2017. And I was co-responsible for part of Horizon 2020. That part of Horizon 2020 is probably quite well known to Viola and Marcel. It's Societal Challenge 6, which is the societal challenge that addresses inclusive, innovative, and reflective societies. Europe in a changing world is kind of the headline. And in that initiative, we were spending about 200 million euros a year in total for the 7 years, more than $1 billion. But it put together social scientists, people in humanities, people in digital innovation, researchers and collaborators, including industry and international collaboration. So quite a mixed bag. And what happens when you are developing these kind of programs and you develop the work program, you've got an advisory committee of the stakeholders, the scientists in this case, mostly. And we were discussing in 2014 with this committee that really everybody was just defending their own one single bullet and wanted to have their bullet, their topic in the work program on social sciences, on humanities, on digital innovation, on international collaboration. So the whole cake was divided up in little, ever more smaller bullets. And we said to them, you risk really that this part, which is very important because it's about the big societal challenges that Marcel and Viola have really indicated, you make yourself completely irrelevant. So the scientific committee said to me, so what do you mean, Paul? What is relevant? And I said, well, why don't you take a really big challenge? And if you remember 2014, we just got into the war in Ukraine and the Crimea area. So we said, why don't you take peace and war, this conflict with Russia and Europe and Russia? That's a really important and relevant challenge. And we're actually working with Ukraine for modernizing, for doing digital government, for example. It's a case of international collaboration. It's certainly a case where you need to be sensitive to social change. And then there was this one professor who stood up, I must say a history professor, and he said, don't give any money to these people that are doing digital innovation. You first need to understand 2000 years history of the Crimea area. And we said, but that's precisely the point. That's why you need to sit together in one activity that understands 2000 years of history and can do digital innovation and fits in the geopolitical international relationship that is very, very tense. Peace and war. Okay, they all went away and it led to nothing. Why? I think one of the reasons, I didn't quite figure it out, I still don't quite understand it, but I think your initiatives are pointing part of the way. But I thought there's one thing that is really missing. They didn't speak the same language. They didn't have a common language at all. And that certainly comes out of education and out of the silo approach that we have in discipline. So the interdisciplinarity was just live and failing live there. So I'm very glad that we have moved beyond that point and we see these great initiatives like the ones that Marcel is outlining and Viola are outlining, that is actually now becoming a reality because we really need them. This is about the really important problems in society. That's also, I think, where, let me move to Digital Enlightenment Forum, where we are trying to make a little contribution with Digital Enlightenment Forum about really relevant challenges that are at this interface between digital economy, society, and democracy. So Digital Enlightenment Forum, if I now move to that, is a community of people that would like to understand better and provide input for better policy making on this interplay between digital economy and society. And we are bringing together their experts and professionals from academia, industry, and policy, and with respect for human values. That also includes quite a large set of universities. I will say something about that later. Over the years, Digital Enlightenment Forum has been organizing events and undertaking studies, and we had also several celebrities in our midst amongst these people participating, such as Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the former European Commissioner Viviane Reding, Andrew Keen, an internet visionary from California, and others. Often the meetings that Digital Enlightenment Forum organizes are in Brussels, but they're also held in other places. We have had them in the Netherlands, in Ireland, in Luxembourg, and other places. And generally, Digital Enlightenment Forum is appreciated because the discussions are really high quality engagement with policymakers. Now, this all started about 10 years ago, when in 2009, a group of people wrote a report which was called, at that time, Trust in the Information Society. And many of the findings of that report went actually into the digital agenda that the European Commission was developing at that time. And that group was led by George Matakidis, who is also here, and who is kind of like a bridging person between Digital Humanism and Digital Enlightenment Forum, and also someone who can very well bridge back to 10 years ago. George, at that time, together with a group of friends, continued to get together in a very informal way to carry that flag forward of this debate. There were people involved like Jacques Bus of the European Commission, Kim Cameron of Microsoft, who identified the 7 laws of identity, Reinhard Posch, perhaps also well known for our Austrian friends, the CIO of the Austrian government, a member of European Parliament, Ali Ploy, computer scientist and legal scientist and others. And George hosted these meetings in the kind of 18th century fashion enlightenment approach. You invite people at home. You offer some good wine and some good food, and you can discuss these important things, but also in an open atmosphere of friendship. But at that time, 10 years ago, life was a bit more rosy, perhaps in terms of how we looked at digital society than it is today. We were actually just having the Arab Spring. The world was opening up, isn't it? Got really enlightened. But we were not yet confronted with the Snowden revelations in 2013, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, Brexit, the US elections, and not to mention the dystopia of China's technology dictatorship that we see today. So the world has really changed, but nevertheless, also at that time, some signals were already visible of threats, you might say, digital threats. And that is what Digital Enlightenment Forum 10 years ago took up. So they started discussing about, for example, the falsehood of the opposition between privacy and security, about the ethical issues, about the broader scope of privacy, in fact. And that also was a real input to the policy making in the European Commission that then happened on the GDPR, which of course took a long time after that to finally make it into law. There were also other issues that Digital Enlightenment then championed, for example, net neutrality. Again, I don't know if people remember 2014. What did we get? 1 million signatures on net neutrality. So Digital Enlightenment organized an event where Tim Berners-Lee was the keynote speaker, and where in fact Tim Berners-Lee also announced the predecessor of Solid, the work that he's working on now. Discussions on cybersecurity, ethics in the digital world, the future of Internet of Things, surveillance and civil liberties, health data, artificial intelligence and skills and jobs. And last November, an event on democracy and media with a lot of attention for citizen movements, citizen engagement. Now, over the last decade, because that's kind of like a decade of work, it was not only this what of the themes that evolved, you know, kind of like having the nose out for what is going to come, what will become really important, but also the way, the how of engaging between these scientists, the academics, the industry, and the policymakers. There were yearbooks produced. There were then also a series of studies produced. So Digital Enlightenment Forum did a series of 3 studies for the EIT Digital. One on the European approach for Industry 4.0, a second one on digital infrastructures, data and European digital sovereignty. So that was really ahead of the sovereignty debate, which is now really hot in Brussels. And a third sector, a third study that came out this year, it's just issued actually, on the sectorial impact of artificial intelligence. So Digital Enlightenment Forum is now looking, of course, forwards again, in terms of the what, the how, and the why. In terms of the what, you need to look at what are these kind of new thematic priorities. And it's very interesting to have the discussions here also, because that gives ideas also for what, as Digital Enlightenment Forum, you can organize and interact with policymakers. For example, we will surely talk a lot more about sovereignty and about democracy. And they are very, very political themes and very much triggered or put at a sharp end because of digital. We will also organize a conference in 2021 on democracy. And just a month ago, we held an event that was kind of like an input to that. We had an online discussion on democracy under the impact of COVID-19. And quite interesting, one of the great speakers there was, for example, Martin Wolf, who's quite a famous journalist of the Financial Times, and Nuria Oliver, a leading AI scientist. So sovereignty, democracy are themes. They also have a lot to do with identity of us as individuals or as groups, as movements. Think of this movement, for example. Or the identity of states in the digital world. It has to do with the values, with education. I'm very happy that that has also been explicitly mentioned, and with human rights. So I'm pretty sure that all these topics will be on the agenda in 2021 and beyond. So that's about the what, the themes, but also about the how. You need to kind of continue to innovate in these settings. I mean, it started perhaps off as meeting of a group of friends around the table with some good wine and food, but we are living in another world. So we have also evolved in terms of the activities, conferences, workshops, white papers, books, studies. Perhaps it's also time to start thinking about how do you move from talking to acting. So what is actionable out of the interactions that we have and we discuss? Same, I think, for digital humanism, and very much to work together with others like digital humanism. I think there are great opportunities there to work together. We, George, for example, is in the committee for digital humanism. We have kind of an exchange, a collaboration already ongoing, and that can be extended. And I would very much also look forward for Digital Enlightenment Forum to team up with the activities of Viola, Marcel, and others here around the table. But we have also looked into other forms of engagement in these COVID times. And so let me mention one example. I think successfully we actually did find a new form of engagement that you can do very well in this time. Conferences and workshops is more difficult to have them. You can do them online, but we started something else, which are fireside chats. And in the fireside chats, in our network of Digital Enlightenment Forum, we have many universities and many people that have gray hair or don't have any hair anymore and can bring in some senior experience. And so what we started to organize is meetings where a senior person sits together with 6 to 8 master or PhD level students or young professionals. And these online meetings are held for just an hour or 1.5 hours. And the senior person brings in a theme, but actually also brings in kind of like life experience. And so the theme is discussed for 15 minutes, and then the students, 6 to 8 is a bit of an exclusive group, are starting to ask questions, to interact. They tell what they do, and they also hear, how did this person get to the stage of life where they are? What happened to them? Why are they there? So it's also about the exchange of the life experience. Pretty lightweight, very easy to organize, also very easy for the students, also for the person who's hosting it. It's engaging and engaged because it's also about people, you know, it's not only about a theme, but works very well. The participants are from different places in Europe and outside Europe, different universities and different disciplines. So they hear also from each other. You know, it's also interesting for students to hear from students from another university, as I think Marcel would probably very much confirm. And it's kind of like, I don't know if people know the work of Erik Erikson. It's kind of like, from the senior perspective, it's the generativity that you deploy here, you might say. So what kind of topics do they bring to the table there? Well, we have had discussions on digital rights, on digital sovereignty, on policy making in the European Commission. We have a whole set of discussions coming on artificial intelligence, on the digital industry, on policy making in the European politics in the European Parliament, on augmenting human collective intelligence, on digital and media, on the centralization and decentralization pendulum on the internet, on co-creation of health data platforms, and on the history of technology. So you can hear it lends itself in these small discussions for interdisciplinarity. So the firesides are quite a success, I must say. Rings a bell. So if you are interested in it to participate, either as let's say someone who is the host, the senior, or as a junior participant, send us, drop us a line. You know, happy to work with you. And actually, these young professionals now take up the baton themselves. They have organized on the 6th of November their own event. So no longer that it was organized kind of for them, but they organized their own event, which was an online debate on the US elections and on digital and dystopias. Very original, very engaging. So finishing.
Or can you conclude? Okay,
yeah, let me conclude. So about the why are we doing these kind of things? Well, we think that it is that enlightenment still holds. You need to have that space where you can have reason and a human-centric approach for discussion, the middle ground. This is still an idea that is always and continues to be very relevant. And in fact, if you remember history, enlightenment preceded a number of revolutions. I don't know if we get a number of resolutions now, but some people feel that there is a watershed moment in the making, and we should perhaps seriously discuss that. So I would like to invite you to take contact, to participate in Digital Enlightenment Forum, to work together. It's an open invitation. It's all lightweight. You will make new friends and get new contacts and also really benefit from the rich experience of others, or also, I think, from the dynamism and the energy of young people. So thank you, Carlo. I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul, for the interesting presentation and all the range of activities that you're doing. We have some time, 15 minutes left for discussion, for questions to the speakers. If there's any question or comments, proposals for things to do based on what you heard. If anybody wants to take the floor, please raise your hand. I see George. Okay, George, you can unmute yourself and you can start talking.
Okay, I just unmuted myself and I will start talking. I want to say two things. First of all, well, we couldn't have Michelle with us today because of this fire alarm. But there are also other organizations that have very related activities. I jotted down keywords from the presentations that preceded. Interdisciplinarity was everywhere. Putting people at the core, or putting humans in the middle, or anthropocentric, that was also there. And it just made me think of these were exactly the keywords, not only at the beginning of the discussions that created Digital Enlightenment Forum, but also other organizations like the Web Science Trust. Some of you may be familiar with, where there are academic programs established. That it started at Southampton, but now at Oxford, there are master's and PhD programs on web science. And if you look at them, it's the same keywords. It's interdisciplinarity, it's bringing together social sciences, humanities, and computer science, trying to establish a common language, which was much harder 10 years ago than perhaps it is today. So the first point I want to make is that we could make an effort to bring some of these organizations closer together and in contact. And the second point is simply to support very strongly the point that Paul made very clearly earlier. There's the issue of understanding what is happening, or trying to anticipate what is coming. And there's also the part of acting on it by influencing in whichever way we can. And in that second part, I think we can bring our efforts together so as to maximize our impact. On the understanding part, each one can go a bit their own way, and that gives richness and diversity. On the acting, we can perhaps focus on some activities, and in particular, the last activity that Paul described, these fireside chats that bring together young researchers, usually at master's or PhD or postdoctoral level. And when comes the time to discuss issues like democracy, I mean, it's the world that those young people will be living in when, let's say, the literal or figurative graybeards will have departed for greener, I hope, pastures. So this is a very concrete activity on which we can cooperate, expand it, and bring around our respective fora and within them a community of young researchers that are active and contributing to the common goals.
Thank you, George. Is there any other comment or question from people? Paul, you want to say something?
Well,
Yeah.
perhaps I may ask a question to the audience, and in particular also to Viola and Marcel. So in my little anecdote in the beginning, I said, I think people were missing really a common language. And so I think we actually have moved on a lot. We do a lot on the practice of interdisciplinary. I'm wondering how much we do on the science of interdisciplinarity. So including the language, let me illustrate it a little bit. I'm at political sciences in Oxford. And if you look up the history of political sciences, you actually realize it's not that old at all. And before it really was established as political sciences, as probably the people you know who did political sciences, there was a combination of studies that you had to do. They figured out that it was interdisciplinary. And then something happens that in the literature is called the Dutch disease, which is, as a Dutchman, I can say that, which was that the students in political sciences, in the emerging political sciences, had to have 3 full degrees, at least. So they had to have law, economics, sociology, or international relations. They had to have a full degree in each. So at the end of their studies, they were dead. They had only been studying to get 3 full degrees, and they were completely fed up with the field. I found it interesting that Viola said we don't have a bachelor, because perhaps one of the reasons is that we don't actually have a real interdisciplinary education. And we don't know how to teach that in such a way that the students don't get completely exhausted. And that may be something of a language problem. And the other thing I found very interesting, Viola, that you said is that you're using art. So perhaps we are a bit too much focused on languages in the sense that we all know them, written, words, formulas, and we are underestimating the power of other languages like the visual languages. So I'm just wondering, is that something you are working on? Are you also working at that more fundamental level?
Viola, you want to answer?
Yes, of course. This is, I would say, a very fundamental level. Yes, we are working also at this fundamental level, but of course, it's very difficult. And in a sense, we are. I think it was clear that our initiative, of course, now we are well supported by our governance at the university, but this initiative was, let's say, bottom-up initiative more than top-down. And so we started as a group of people coming also from the humanities and social sciences, but with very different backgrounds. So, of course, this is something that we want to address still. And of course, we have addressed already, but still, I agree with you that is something that we need to continuously addressing.
Hannes, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I wanted to, 2 remarks. One is, first of all, thank you for those excellent presentation on the different levels from a university or network university, and then to a, let's say, a broader network of community building and outreach. I think one is also as a result from yesterday, and I agreed with Enrico Nardelli that we will form a subgroup, or we will use also Informatics Europe, but integrate also other disciplines and using digital humanism for developing a curriculum as a, let's say, teaching environment where we could integrate social science, humanities, art, and computer science in, and we will have a discussion how this could be done. And we will do a small group and start with such a work. From the framework you are asking, and I think it's very well described here, framework of this, let's say, different initiatives, but having very similar objective as was described also by George. I think we have three tasks or as a first understanding. We have one as practical theory development. One is on how what's with this interdisciplinarity. It's understanding, but also acting. So it's also, I say it's a practical theory so that it can be implemented. It can not only on the but also practically implemented on the tool level or on the system level, where engineers meet other disciplines. We have a second task, which was, and this is also related to Paul's works of finding a common language and having a common understanding. The second one is, which is strongly related, is this community building groups or having a loose network of let's say related or related initiatives. This is somehow the community building aspect where we want to have critical mass. And the third one is this outreach activity, which is also very well explained and which is not most, but it's also equally important, because at the end, together with a group, you have a critical mass. If you have a practical theory, you need, and you have to have outreach activities to really implement it at the political societal level, because at the end, as it was described by Paul, we are at the tipping point where we really can, where we could interfere and we could really influence something, because there is quite enough, let's say, insecurity in also the political decision making, looking for some guidance. And I think this would be something where we could also provide something. So this was just a general remark, not as a question to the previous speakers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hannes. Is any other person willing to say? Sally, okay.
Sorry, I know it's getting late and people probably want to, I just wanted to pick up the question of...
You still have 5 minutes, Sally.
Oh, right, okay. The question of...
Plus music, sorry.
Oh, yes, interdisciplinarity and language. I mean, I've been involved in lots of different kind of projects with crossing the computer science, data science, and social science humanities kind of boundary. And I don't think there's a shortcut. I think one of the things I've learned is it takes time. And yes, it's important to build communities, but you know, disciplines are there for a reason. And I mean, I completely agree with what's been said, and I think probably everyone here shares, is that questions around digitalization and AI are, you know, too big and too important to leave to one discipline. And we need input from all of them, but we do have to respect those traditions and what those different groups bring. And so, I mean, as a kind of maybe a Friday night anecdote to end with, I was once involved in a project that involved, I was trying to develop, to understand political elites in Indonesia by using the corpora of Indonesian newspapers, of which there are many in many different Indonesian languages. And this, you know, there was a political scientist specialized in Indonesia, a computer scientist, and a mathematician. And this sounds like the beginning of a bad joke, that they walk into a bar and what happens next. And they did almost literally spend 6 months talking with one another about what do we mean by network? Because network is a concept that means very different things in those 3 different disciplines. And so they were spent a long time talking about that and thinking, okay, well, how do we now, what do we mean by an elite network in a political sense? How do we then measure that in these newspapers? And of course, there are all sorts of interesting kind of questions about how you disambiguate non-Western names and places and things like that. But there was no way to speed up that process. You know, they needed that time and they needed that mutual respect to listen to each other and talk with one another. And I think the only thing you can then say is, yeah, when you're doing these kinds of interdisciplinary and trans and multidisciplinary projects, you need to build that time into it. And that's a really important lesson, I think, also for funders who all want interdisciplinary and probably on the cheap. But that just doesn't work. It's my less optimistic Friday evening message.
Yeah, no, I agree very much with what you said, Sally. Thank you very much. Viola wants to add something, and then I also would like to add something.
Just a quick comment, because I really agree with Sally, and time, I guess, is a key element. I mean, I experimented in my case as a philosopher living in an engineering department, but then I think that time is a key element, and we have to be patient from the one side, but also very creative from the other side. That means to respect the different traditions, but also to use imagination to to think about the future.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we are almost on time. I would like to conclude, with a couple of words. Yeah, we should not underestimate inertia in change. It takes time. It is difficult. But also, I think that to favor change, we have to collect experience and share experience of successful cases and share ways to also overcome difficulties that you have in your own institution, for example, when you want to change. So, collecting experience, I think, is something that we, as with Digital Humanism, in collaboration, with our friends from the Digital Enlightenment, being able to collect, the best practices and share them, I think it would be very important to favor change. So with these words, I wish to thank our excellent panelists and the comments from the audience. And I'm very glad to give the floor to music. Music is very dear to my heart. And we conclude today. I don't know if we still have Philip Glass or something else, but it will be a very nice way of concluding this workshop. But, our boss, Hannes, I think wants to say the final word. So I transfer the microphone to Hannes for the final words. Thank you very much.
The final words are only thank you. Thank you for the participation. Thank you for the preparation. Thank you for the excellent content. I think we all have learned a lot, and we have also seen what are issues and how we also could cooperate and how we could move forward. I'm looking forward to see you at the next event and maybe do other things. There are some plans in the pipeline. Thank you, everybody, and see you next time. And now I really hand over to Peter Knees, who will show the video of Erich Brehm playing the piano. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we have another live performance by Erich Brehm, and today he's going to play Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's Piano Sonata number 10 in C major, second movement. Yeah, all I can do is also express my gratitude and say big thanks to everyone involved. Also mentioning to please check our website for upcoming events, to follow us on Twitter, or check out all the talks so far on our YouTube channel. So I will share the video and hope you can see it. Now. So yeah, the final thing for me to do is asking Erich once more to take it away. Have a good rest of your day and weekend. Stay safe and goodbye.